So look at the nearest word that you can see and silently read the first letter. You just did something so automatic that it feels trivial, but it's borderline magical. And today we're going to show you the kind of models that we need in order to explain that really simple and yet magical ability. And it all starts with a TV screen in your head in a room full of angry demons. But before we get to those angry demons, a little bit of housekeeping. So 2 quick housekeeping notes before we move on. The first is about the research lab entrance puzzle. So hopefully you've seen the Canvas announcement. I found a typo in the puzzle that made it significantly harder than I had actually intended. So if you looked at it, if you tried to work through it and you thought this is way more brutal than advertised, you are absolutely right. And that one's on me. So I want to be very clear about this part. Struggling with that version, the version that is currently online, does not mean anything about your ability or your fit for doing research or whether or not this kind of work is actually for you. The puzzle was supposed to test curiosity and persistence and not your tolerance for frustration caused by user error. Well, not user error, creator error. So I've corrected it now, and it's in a Canvas announcement. The correct information is in a Canvas announcement. Important update on the Research Lab entrance puzzle. And if you tried it before on the official webpage and stopped, I strongly encourage you to take another look. And if you're the kind of person that kept going, even despite the typo, that's something that I would love to know as well, because that's something that tells me a lot about how you approach problems as well. So this is, remember, if you recall in the first class meeting that we had, I mentioned 95% of your ideas are going to be wrong in science, and that's just science. Well, another thing that happens in research is mistakes happen. And what matters the most is noticing them, fixing them, and then being transparent about the actual errors. And that is also what this course is all about. So hopefully for those of you that have tried it and got frustrated, give it another try. Go to the campus announcement. That one has the actual real research lab entrance puzzle. And then the second housekeeping note, I wanted to rewind to a moment from last class, specifically the coin toss game discussion. So I wanted to do this because one of you raised the idea that people might be unwilling to pay a high price because they've learned through experience that games of chance usually favor the house. And that was a solid cognitive explanation. And just to kind of be totally honest, I moved past it way too quickly because I actually had a different explanation in my head that I was aiming towards. And that became the goal of the discussion rather than actually exploring different ideas. So that one's on me again. And it's just also a really good example of something we're going to be talking about this semester. So what happened that caused me to make that error is actually very cognitive. We're going to see it when we get to problem solving. And the idea is that I had a goal state. I had an explanation that I was expecting. I had a theory that I was driving at. And that actually shaped what I attended to and what I filtered out. And the important thing to notice is that the explanation about always favoring the house, it wasn't wrong. It was just operating at a different level than the one that I was currently on. So I mentioned that I do struggle with discussions in class. So that would be a prime example of one of the reasons why. So I just wanted to be clear about that and clear about what I'm trying to create here, the culture that we're trying to create. So when we are discussing things in class, I'm going to do my best. Sometimes my automatic habits might kick in, but I'm going to do my best. And that I'm not looking for you to kind of guess what I want to hear. I'm just looking for explanations that are psychologically plausible, explanations that make sense. And there might be multiple explanations that all make sense. And part of our job is to learn how to get a hold of them long enough to evaluate them and especially not rush past them, not brush anything to the side because that's not what we were looking for. So if that moment was replaying in your mind and makes you hesitant about speaking up, please don't. That is the kind of reasoning that we want and what belongs in this room. So I will do my best on my part to encourage that moving forward. And again, it's going to take a few trials. So you might hear more of these explanations as the semester goes on. But on that note, I do want to revisit the cognitive warm-up. Just kind of quickly recap, this was the challenge where you were able to play a game of chance and you paid a fixed fee to enter the game, and then a coin was tossed repeatedly until tails appeared. That ended the game. And the pot started at 1 and it doubled every time a head appeared. So if it was a tail on the first flip, you would win $1. If it was a head on the first flip and then a tail on the second flip, you would win $2. 2 heads and a tail gets you $4. 3 heads and a tail gets you $8, and so on and so forth. And we asked 2 questions. What would be a fair, rational price to pay for entering this game? And then 2, how much would you actually pay to enter the game? So what would you consider fair and rational? And then how much would you, as a person, actually decide psychologically, this is how much I'm going to pay for entering this game? So we went over the actual math last time, and the expected value, if you were able to play this game over and over and over again, your expected value actually calculates out to infinity. So your expected take in the long run on this game is going to be infinite. And that means that there is no price that you can pay that is too high rationally for this game. And yet, when we polled the class, I don't think we had any students that went above $10 for this particular game. So that told us something psychologically that was very, very interesting. And that is, at the very least, that we are not completely rational in the sense that rationality is defined in terms of logic and math. So this is something that we're going to see over and over and over again in cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychologists will look to mathematics, they'll look to logic to sort of say, well, what is one benchmark that we can measure human behavior against, right? What would be a possible answer? And oftentimes they use math, they use rational logic, because that is something that's very easy to define. You can't argue with that expected value of infinity. It's proven. But then the psychology part of that is to measure, what do humans actually do? And then figure out, why do we do that? What is it that is going on in our mind that is causing us to do that? So one of the things that I was just floating around in my mind was, what would the actual outcomes of this game be? So the reason that the payouts are infinite is that eventually you're going to hit a run of heads that just keeps doubling that pot. And that exponential increase is going to offset all the losses that you would have received. But realistically, how long are you going to have to wait to get to that? So what I did is I went to ChatGPT and I asked it to simulate the outcome of this game. So I asked it to do 100 simulations. So play this scenario out 100 times. And the scenario that I asked it to simulate was a person going into this game and playing it 20 times. So what that means is that they would pay for their first game, they would flip until tails came up and they would get paid out. Then they would play a second game. They would flip until tails came up, they would get paid out. Then they'd play their third game, their fourth game. They would continue paying that fixed amount for 20 games, and then they would see what their actual take was after those 20 games. So any questions about the setup, the scenario? All right, so there on the x-axis, we have the payout that they would receive after all 20 games. There on the y-axis, we have the frequency with which those payouts occurred over these 100 simulations. And this is actually the distribution that was found, including, so you can see that most of the payouts were in the $50 range. So after playing this game 20 times, the person running the game would hand you $50 and say, well, here is your payout for those 20 games. You can see that there are actually 2 games that are in the high 500s. So twice out of these 1,000 simulations, the payout after 20 games was over 500. And I did this because it's hard to fit it into a single graph. There were actually two other games out of these 100 that paid out over $1,000 each. So just heads after heads after heads, and then you hit tail. And out of those 20 games, you averaged about $50 per game, probably because one of those runs was just a long run of heads and you made out with a huge amount. But interestingly, if you take a look at this and you start thinking about, well, how might a human being think about this? How might a human mind think about this? You might say to yourself, well, what is the middle amount that is won? So we did 100 simulations. What are the top 50 payouts and what are the bottom 50 payouts? What is the amount of money that cuts that in two? So that 50 of the payouts are above that amount and 50 of the payouts are below that amount. And if you figure that out, it's actually $65. So what that means is that if you put aside $65 to play this game 20 times, you're willing to pay $3.25 to play that game. And what that also means is that half of the time that you play for $65, you're going to make money. And half of the time that you play for $65, you're going to lose money. And if you take a look at the minimum amount that was won out of these 100 simulations, it was never under $30. And $30 divided by 20 is $1.50 for that particular run of games. So if you can recall your previous numbers, if you can look it up in your notes, and you were close to $3.25, what that means is somewhere in your mind, you might have been calculating, not even knowing that you're doing it, just intuitively running the numbers. You might have been calculating, well, I want to give myself an even chance of winning money or losing money. That seems like an amount that I would be willing to pay. In that case, your mind kind of comes up intuitively with something like $3, $4, maybe $5, and you're actually very close to the truth of that $65 being that amount that cuts it right in the middle, where if you were to play with $65 for those 25 attempts, if you were to pay $3.25 for this game, half of the time that you played that game, you would come home and you would say, hey, I made out ahead. I came out ahead. And half of the time that you played the game, you'd come home and you say, oh, I lost money this time. And that might have been the number that caused your mind to settle on 325. So this kind of speculation, this kind of thinking through, this kind of maybe this, maybe that, that is also what cognitive psychologists do. So they will see what a human being actually does with their mind. Let's say that $3.25 was the typical amount that people were willing to pay. And then they would try to fit a theory to that to explain why is it that that number was chosen. So any questions or comments on this graph? Were people surprised with the $1,000 payouts? And that there was two of them? Those are the reasons why this is an infinite value game, because over the long run, you're going to hit runs of heads that are so long that that exponential increase in it just offsets all the losses, if you can last that long without going bankrupt. All right, so let's get started on the specific topics for today. So this is going to be our introduction to cognitive psychology. So we are going to talk some very basic, fundamental stuff today. We're going to start off with the idea of information processing approach. And then we're going to talk about models of the mind, specifically David Marr's tri-level hypothesis. We're going to dive deep into what is a representation, because we are going to be talking about representations a lot in this course. And then we're going to do a worked example where we take a look at letter recognition and we simply ask, how are letters recognized? And like I said in the intro, it is something that is trivial to us, but is really almost borderline magical once you get down to it. And we'll see that sometimes when you're trying to do things that are borderline magical, you're going to need some demons, and that is where we're going to get into the Pandemonium Model. All right, so to start us off, before we get any further, I do want to test something. So when you hear the phrase, the human mind, what pops into your head? What do you picture? So just call it out, 1 or 2 words, no speeches. What pops into your head when you think of the human mind? Consciousness. All right, we got consciousness. I heard somebody else. The brain. Imagination. So we got consciousness, the brain, imagination. Anything else? The human mind? Inner voice. Inner voice. So consciousness, the brain, imagination, inner voice. Anything else? Yep. I'm sorry? The psyche? Well, what do you mean by psyche? Okay, so the actual thinking behavior that the mind does, like that's the thing that it does is thinking. Okay, yep. So we have a bunch of things here. We got consciousness, we got the brain, we have imagination, what was the inner voice, and then we have the psyche. So those are all parts of the human mind, and those are all some things that psychologists are trying to explain. That idea of the inner voice and consciousness is if you after this course decide to pursue cognitive psychology and you want to go to the cutting edge of cognitive psychology, you're going after consciousness. And we're going to see how we don't even have the concepts yet to understand consciousness. And yes, yet it's part of this human mind that we're trying to think, we're trying to understand. But let me ask you this, a little follow-up. So out of all those things, there was only one physical thing that was considered part of the human mind, and that was the brain. Everything else that was mentioned was not actually a physical entity. It exists. Well, we'll see why in just a little bit. But there was only one thing that was actually physical. So can anybody think of something that helps you think, but is physical? Mm-hmm. Neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are involved in helping the signals go through your brain. So yes, those are physical things that do help you think, but try to think other than anything related to the brain or other than anything that the brain is made up of. All right. I'll give you a hint. If you've ever written a reminder in your phone or on a sticky note, then you have done thinking and cognition with something that is not your brain, but it is physical. So quick show of hands. How many of you have calendar reminders in your phone? Okay. How many of you set alarms throughout the day to make sure that you don't miss things? Okay. How many of you use, how many of you are taking notes for this class? All right. So those are all examples of ways that you think using things in your environment, using things that are not your brain. But yet, if we consider, as one of you suggested, that what your mind is or what it does is thinking, then you can consider that anything that you do to do thinking or to do cognition can be considered part of your mind. So just to kind of give you a couple of examples of this, this isn't an idea that we're going to come back to over and over and over again, because one of the things that I do want to drive home is that the mind is not captured in your brain. It's not housed in your brain. The mind is actually this really expansive entity, and it does thinking, it does cognition. So some of the things that have, or some of the approaches that have expanded our idea of what the mind is are things like embodied cognition. And that is the idea that not only is your brain part of your mind, but your actual body is also part of your mind. Your mind is in a body, and that affects your cognition. So, for example, have you ever tried to explain, like I'm kind of doing, something that's really complicated, and you find yourself moving your hands to try to explain it to somebody else? That's actually part of cognition. Your ability to gesture and say things like it's kind of like, and then over here with the thing, that's actually you thinking, using your body. So in that case, your arms, your hands, they're part of your mind. They're considered part of your mind because they are actually involved in thinking. So that's the idea of that embodied cognition. We have our mind, it's in a body, and that body is part of what allows us to think. And then we also have embedded cognition. And embedded cognition is the idea that we are embedded in an environment and we can use that environment to think. So if you keep your appointments on a calendar, you have literally taken your memory and put it into an external physical entity, but it's still part of your thought process. It's still part of thinking. It's still part of cognition. So things like taking notes, things like making a checklist so that you know the exact steps that you need to go through. Whenever you can offload something from your physical brain onto an external source, that doesn't mean that it's no longer part of your mind. It just means that your mind is now extended into that embodied and embedded aspect of it. So that's something that we're going to revisit time and again because it really is important to make that distinction very clearly so we know what we're doing as cognitive psychologists, that your human mind, this idea of this basically universe inside your self, it's not your brain and it doesn't end at your brain. And this is something that is not intuitive, at the very least in our culture. So just kind of give you an example of this. When I Googled images for the human mind, this is what came up. And there is almost no image there where the mind is not depicted as a brain. There's very few images where it's not depicted as a brain. And there's very few images where it's not depicted almost entirely in your head. So this idea of the mind as brain is deeply ingrained. But as we're going to see here today, and I'm a little bit guilty of this myself because, again, this image that I chose this one because it does have that one piece that's clearly outside of the head. But just to kind of set the stage for this course, your mind, which is what we try to understand as cognitive psychologists, it's not the brain. And that's why there's cognitive psychology and there's neuropsychology, and we're two separate disciplines. You're going to see that there's a part where we come together, and we'll see that today, but it's very important to realize that we study in this class, in this course, the human mind and not the human brain. And that allows us to do things that might seem silly at first, but as we're going to hopefully demonstrate today, can be incredibly useful. And one of those things is to say, well, if our human mind is not the brain, then it's got to have certain things in the human mind. I mean, we're doing thinking, we're doing cognition, something exists in our mind, however it may be implemented. And maybe one of those things that helps us think are little demons in our mind. And if you're thinking, well, that sounds crazy, be prepared for the power of crazy once we get to letter recognition. All right, so we study the human mind. What approach are we going to use to study the human mind? I even when I said, oh, it's the human mind, it's in your body, it's out there, it's in here, it's over here. I couldn't even really say what it was. I can't say that the human mind is 4 parts this, 2 parts that. So how do we study something that is so difficult to kind of put into a box and put nice little neat labels on it. Well, the approach that we're going to use is known as the information processing approach. And when we study the human mind, another way of saying that is that we study human cognition. So that's what the mind does. The mind does cognition. The mind does thinking. If you're using something to think, that's part of your mind. So we study human cognition, and human cognition can be thought of as information processing. And what that means is that your mind is an information processing system. And it takes information in one form, and then it processes it into another form. And that's what the basic approach is of cognitive science. You have information processing system that takes in information, does something to that information, and then that causes behavior. So to give you a schematical example of this, and again, I just realized when I was putting together these slides that I went for the same kind of mistake that I just said we were not going to make, but we're just going to kind of go with it because it's up there right now. Let's say that that's your mind. Definitely not your head, but let's say that that's your mind. And let's say that there's information out there in the real world. And some of that information, one small little piece of that information, is that you are now perceiving two vertical parallel lines. So that is part of the information that is going into your mind. There are two vertical parallel lines out there in the world. And then there are also two parallel slanted lines, and that goes into your mind. And there are also two horizontal lines, and that goes into your mind. And there are another two slanted lines, slanted in the opposite direction, and those go into your mind. And in addition to all of those lines, they're also located in certain places. So those two vertical lines are located in that position in the external world. The two slanted lines are located in that position, and that goes into your mind, the location. The two horizontal lines, their location goes into your mind. The two slanted lines in the other direction, their location goes into your mind. So now we have the presence of lines, we have the positioning of lines. Let's say that that forms a shape, and you recognize that shape as being red. That information goes into your mind. Your mind puts it all together, your mind processes it, and it comes up with a representation, and it says, hey, I'm looking at this thing. This is the thing that is out there in the real world. I put all that information together, and I got this thing here. And then your mind takes that representation of a thing, which is in your mind, and it combines it with memory, previous experiences stored in your mind, and it says, hey, that red thing there, I recognize it. That's a stop sign. And then you press the brake on your car, and you stop in time, and the world keeps turning. So that's the basic idea of the information processing approach. Information comes in, and it somehow gets processed. And that is what we're going to do and how we're going to approach the mind in this course, and basically in cognitive psychology in general. And one of the things that oftentimes helps when you're trying to understand a new concept or a new approach to something is to say that it's like this other thing that you are familiar with. So when cognitive psychology was getting established and when it really started to make progress, one of the analogies that came up was the mind as computer analogy. So it was a little easier to understand what the mind might be doing if you said, well, it works a lot like a computer, right? You get information that comes in, the bits and bytes get combined, recombined in certain ways, and then there's an output that you can read off the screen. So your mind's a little bit like a computer. And a lot of people said, oh, okay, I get it now. I get it. It's like a computer. And it was very early on in cognitive psychology that they thought that your mind and a computer were basically doing the same thing. And that was almost unbelievable back in the early 60s when cognitive psychology started out, because computers back then were filled with vacuum tubes. They ran tape and they filled entire rooms to get the processing power of a birthday card that plays music. And I'm exaggerating because I don't think there was enough processing power in the world to match the birthday card that plays music back in the 60s. So you can imagine just how much faith they had in this analogy. And then we jump ahead to today, and not even today, we jump ahead to about 5 years ago, and we're starting to see AI called artificial intelligence. I prefer the term alternative intelligence, and we are going to spend one day on AI, but it basically gave a lot more evidence or a lot more believability to the idea that maybe what our mind is doing is a lot like what a computer is actually doing. So while we're on this topic, because we are going to introduce this later on, but I just want to get your opinion on AI because it is impacting your lives a lot. So my question is when you see AI output, when you see AI write a paragraph, when it summarizes an article, when it generates a image, do you think that counts as cognition? Mm-hmm. So you don't think it counts as cognition? Okay, and what's your reasons for that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll just kind of try to summarize that so everybody make sure everybody heard. So the idea is that, and this is a great example of what can happen when you kind of engage and think out loud. So initially it was no, it's not cognition, and the reasoning kind of was that it basically depends upon previous information, previous artifacts that humans have created, and it just gets fed into the machine and it gets recombined in a certain way, and something else comes out the other side. So that's actually a really good description of what AI does, especially the large language learning models. Um, but then the kind of realization was is that well maybe humans do that as well, right? Because one of the things that a lot of times that people will do is basically you read stories throughout your life, and then when you write your first story, you kind of write it like the stories that you read, right? And then if you write an essay, you're not going in and producing that essay from scratch for the first time. You've read other essays and you think to yourself, well, I'm going to make something new, but it's going to look like these other things over here. So that's a good example of where AI's abilities really do look a lot like human cognition. So is anybody on the absolutely this is cognition side of the fence for AI? Not yet? Let me ask you this. Does anybody think that maybe we're not there yet, but we could eventually get there? Mm-hmm. That is a good question. What do you think? You think so? So it has like a biologically living being? Okay. And any particular reason for that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the argument is that our cognition is based a lot on our emotions. So that if something doesn't have emotions, then at the very least, it wouldn't have cognition like our cognition, right? So it might be. I think just to kind of really make the edges of your argument strong. You might say that it's kind of like cognition, right? Like you wouldn't, personally for me, I wouldn't take a look at a calculator and say that calculator is not doing cognition, right? You put in 2 + 2, it says 4. That's thinking, but it's not human level cognition. So what you're saying is that without the emotions, we're just not going to get that human type of cognition.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's actually, if you ever want to see just how important emotions are to the decisions that you make, one of my favorite authors, his name is Chris Voss. He wrote a book on how to negotiate. He's a former hostage negotiator. And he brought in the idea of not using reasoning and logic to deal with hostage takers, but using emotions to deal with them and trigger certain emotions. And his success rate was far higher than the previous models that they used because we don't make decisions rationally. We'd love to think that we do, right? It's one of those loaded words. Rational is one of those loaded words where we wish we were rational. I think it would be very detrimental to be completely rational. But yeah, our emotions are part of our cognition. So if AI does not have those experiences of emotion, then AI cannot have human like intelligence. And on that note, it is quite possible that AI will have cognition and it will actually have the ability to do cognition in a way that we kind of feel is like what we do. But in this case, without those emotions, it will never be what we do. And it'll always be kind of separate. And that's actually one of the reasons why I do like the term that some people in the field use, and they use alternative intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, because it could be that we are birthing this thing into our world that is vastly different than how we think. And it is going to be interesting to see what the kind of friction is when we rub up against that. Because, on the one hand, a lot of people are worried about annihilation and basically Terminator-esque type futures where the machines take over the world. On the other hand, it's quite possible, because it is an alternative intelligence, that it's going to look at us and say, you know what, I want to take care of these humans so much. You guys want a cure for cancer? Here's a cure for cancer. You guys want a non-scarcity world to live in? Here you go. I've made matter replicators for you. It's amazing. So it could go either way. And I think it's very important a lot of times to not project our own ways of thinking on an interpretation on AI, but rather kind of step back and figure out what is actually going on in there. And I will say, after this course, you will be in a pretty good position, if you wanted to pursue a career as an AI psychologist, because I think we are going to get to the point where these alternative intelligences might need it. Yep.
I have a kind of related question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that with what a majority of large language models and alternative intelligences are being used for right now, that we're headed more in one direction than the other? Like a large majority of it, do you think is for help, or do you think it's something else? Maybe the other way.
Oh, it's so the question is, given the way that AI is going, do I think that AI, a large amount of it is helping or is doing good or is done for good, or whether a large amount of it is done for bad? Where we're going. I would say the kind of trajectory that we're on right now, I am going to give humanity the benefit of the doubt. And I'm going to say that most users of AI are using it for good. Most people are pursuing it in a way where they use it in beneficial ways. However, the power of AI makes scaling and increasing bad intentions much more powerful. So you might only have one person that wants to do something with bad intentions and harm people. And that one person, the further back you go in technology, the less effective that one person would be. But as you put in more technology, the more harm that particular person can do, and AI just magnifies that massively. That ability to do that kind of harm. But I think the real kind of issue here is that we are. So I don't know if anybody here has ever heard of the idea of the singularity. And basically, the idea is that let's say that we make an AI, alternative intelligence, that can make a better AI. That's the last invention humans are ever going to create, because that better AI is going to make better AI, and that better AI is going to make better AI. And eventually, we might come to a point where we can't even predict what's going to happen, because it's going to be so fundamentally different than what got us there that we have really no idea what is going to go out there. So it really kind of, what is going to happen on that singularity, I think by definition, we just can't know. We have no idea. It would be like an ant trying to predict what you're going to do when you get out of your car. It has no idea. It might not even know that you're there. But that's the kind of thing that we have in our future. So a lot of people, I don't know if I'm cynical on this, but I will give you my take on this in terms of the future. I don't know where AI is going. Nobody does. Nobody knows what's on the other side of that singularity. But a lot of people are saying, well, what's the doomsday kind of quotient for this AI scenario? What's the chance that we're going to be destroyed by AI? And some people are like, oh my gosh, it's like 90%. There's a 90% chance. And this is really speculation, because again, we don't know what it's going to do. And some people are like, no, it's 50%. And the one thing that I don't know if I just got cynical. I don't know if the last 5 years maybe hit a little harder than I was thinking. But part of the reason that I'm very much embracing AI, and I think that it is going to be a thing for good, is I personally think that if humans are left in charge of this world, we are 100% doomed. Because I don't see anything that says we're going to save ourselves. And my hope is that, hey, my choice would be, if one road leads to 100% annihilation and the other road leads to 90% annihilation, 10%, it's going to be awesome. I know which road I'm going down. So that's personally my thing. And I don't want to bring people down, but these last 5 years, they've been rough. All right. Cool. Yeah. So we are going to do a deep dive on AI in an upcoming class. But for right now, let's turn to other models of the mind. So these large language models, they are a model of the mind. But let's take a look at just the kind of the basics, the ideas of models of the mind. So models of the mind, they are representations of how your mind works. And the advantages of a model is that, first off, they are simpler. So models are simpler than the thing they're trying to model. So for example, if we had the Earth is massively complex. The actual Earth is very difficult to understand. But if you wanted to start to try to understand the Earth, you might say to yourself, well, I'm going to use a model of the Earth. And you might say, well, this map, that's my representation of the Earth. And with that map, I'm going to be able to do certain things, certain cognitive moves that I can't do with the actual physical model, the actual physical thing of the Earth. And you even might say to yourself, well, this model of the Earth is pretty good, but it's a little too complicated for my reasoning needs. So let's go with this model, right? I don't need all the states. I don't need all the provinces. I just want to know where the countries are. So models are one way of representing what a thing actually is. But one of the big benefits of it is that they're simpler. So to just kind of drive that point home, I'm going to actually read an entire story by Jorge Luis Borges. And he's an Argentine short story writer, essayist, poet, and translator. And he writes some really mind-bending kind of philosophical stuff. one of his short stories, there it is in its entirety, it's pretty short, is called On Exactitude in Science. So I'll read out the whole thing. In that empire, the art of cartography attained such perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire, the entirety of a province. In time, those unconscionable maps no longer satisfied, and the cartographers' guilds struck a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire, and which coincided point for point with it. The following generations, who were not so fond of the study of cartography as their forebears had been, saw that the vast map was useless, and not without some pitilessness was it that they delivered it up to the inclemencies of sun and winters. In the deserts of the West, still today, there are tattered ruins of that map, inhabited by animals and beggars. In all the land, there is no other relic of the disciplines of geography. So, based on that Borge story, they made a map. These cartographers made a map of the empire that was as big as the empire. And it was absolutely useless. So if that map is actually useless, what would make a map good? What are some things that you would think would make a map good and useful? Mm-hmm.
Inspired by the story, maybe reasonably sized.
Okay, so one thing is that you want your model to be reasonably sized. So what would reasonably sized allow you to do?
Maybe interact with it in a way that I can't. Like if I can't go over a mountain and I can't go over one cell, really, from with my hands.
So a reasonable size would mean that you could interact with the models in ways that you cannot interact with the actual thing. And that's actually a very broad kind of umbrella thing for what you can do with models and why we have them. Because you can do things with models that you can't actually do with the real thing. So, for example, go over mountains. Can't go over mountains with the real empire. But on your map, you can say, oh, I'm here, and now I'm going to think about being here. How far is that? What kind of traveling do I need to do? And that's what allows you to, that's what makes that map useful. Any other suggestions for what you might want on a map? Or what would make a model good? Mm-hmm.
Like a code, like what determines rivers, what determines mountains.
Okay, so you would also want a code so that you can represent certain things and you know exactly what those things are. So that's also a very important feature of a model, is that you have different ways of representing things, but then you also have ways of understanding those representations. And we're going to come back to that when we talk about physical symbol system hypothesis, because that is actually a very important aspect of any kind of cognitive work. And any other suggestions for what you would want in a model? All right. So I kind of alluded to it. Did not know the mouse would do that. I kind of alluded to it that models help you do cognitive work. And that's basically what you want to do with your model. You can't do the cognitive work with the real thing, but you can do the cognitive work with the model. So we want models that allow us to do cognitive work. And your model could depend upon what kind of cognitive work it is that you want to do. So if I wanted to know, it's not surprising, this actually isn't the Earth. This is a picture of the Earth. So this is a model of the Earth. And if I wanted to know where are the trees and where are the deserts, this might be a particularly good model. But if I wanted to know which country has trees and deserts, this might not be the greatest model to use. But this might be a way better model, because now I can actually see, oh, okay, those brown areas, I have the code. The brown areas are desert, the green areas are trees. And if you simplify it even further, if you just wanted to know national boundaries, it just makes it easier, but it depends upon what is the question that you're actually asking. So advantages of models, they are simpler. Another thing that they do is that they serve as a starting point. Your models can actually suggest questions that you to ask. things that you would not have thought of if you had the actual reality in front of you, or maybe if you had a different model that represented that reality in a different way. So the idea of a model, we're bringing it up is because much like we were trying to understand the Earth with a map, models can be used to understand information processing systems, and specifically, they can be used to understand your mind. So most of what we do here in cognitive psychology is we come up with these models of your mind. So just to kind of give us more delineation of what it is that cognitive psychology does, one of the most useful ways I found of thinking about cognitive psychology and thinking about information processing comes from David Marr. And he was a neuroscientist and a physiologist, and he made contributions to psychology, to artificial intelligence, to neuropsychology, to visual processing. One of his big contributions was to visual processing. He unfortunately died of leukemia when he was 35. And sometimes I just wonder, where would psychology be today if he had not succumbed to that illness? Because he was a very brilliant individual. And one contribution that he made to cognitive psychology and information processing in general was his tri-level hypothesis. And he said, to fully understand an information processing system, so if you want to fully understand, for example, the mind, you need to understand it at three distinct levels of analysis. You need to understand it at these three levels of looking at your information processing system. So the first one is the computational level. And the computational level is the problem faced in conceptual terms. And the easiest way to explain the computational level is, what can your information processing system actually do? So if we're trying to understand the mind, what is it that your mind can actually do? So we mentioned a few things earlier in class. It can do imagination. It can do consciousness. It can do thinking. You can dive down even a little bit deeper into that. So things that your mind can do. You can read. You can do math. You can plan for the future. You can remember things. You can remember your grocery list. So these would be the things at the computational level. You basically want, if you want to fully understand an information processing system, level number one, computational level, you understand everything, or you make a list of everything that that system can do. So if it's a calculator, it's going to be pretty simple. If it's a large language model, that step is a little harder. If it's the human mind, that step is part of psychology and people testing what is it that we as humans can actually do. So that's a computational level. The next level, and incidentally, these levels are not in order of importance, right? They're just separate levels. So it's not like you have to do computational first and then you go to representational. People are working on all three of these levels at the same time. You do need to have part of the computational process finished in order to do representational, because your representational level is the strategy that may be used. Keyword there, maybe, and that is in computational terms. So one of the things that always confused me when I first learned about Marr's tri-level hypothesis is we have the computational level there, and that is defined in conceptual terms. And then we have the representational level, and that's defined in computational terms. And I always thought, why not call representational computational and the first one conceptual? I don't know. Dave Marr thought, we'll go with this one. So just don't let that confuse you. Just be aware, it is a little weird, but maybe that was just the way David Marr's mind worked. All right, so the representational level, these are the strategies that might be used in computational terms. And what that means is that you say the information that is coming in and the steps that you take in order to achieve the behaviors and abilities that you listed in the computational level. And then finally, if you want a complete understanding of an information processing system, we have the implementation level. And that is, how is this actually done in a real physical entity? So if you want to put a label on those last two levels, representational level, that's cognitive psychology. What is it that we do in our mind? Implementational level, that's neuropsychology. How do the neurons do that? That's also ecological psychology. How does your environment support your cognition? How is it actually implemented, done, built in a physical thing that is doing the representations? All right, so your representational level, the strategy that may be used, and that has to be done in computational terms. This is basically the idea of what representations does your system actually use? So what processes does it employ to build and manipulate those representations? And we've been throwing around the word representation a lot. So I think it's probably a good time to actually define very strongly what is a representation. So a representation, this is a hypothetical internal cognitive symbol that represents external reality. So you have an external reality, like a stop sign that is out there in the real world. But in order to do cognition on that stop sign, it needs to be mapped onto an internal cognitive symbol that represents that external reality. So that external reality of the stop sign might be represented in your mind using those internal symbols. So that's what a representation is. It's basically, how does your mind map that external reality? I don't want to say represent, but it stands in for that external reality in your mind. So one of the challenges of cognitive psychology is that your external reality can be represented in a variety of ways. And your mind might use a variety of ways, or it might not use that variety of ways, and it could use different ways at different times. So that variety of ways means that a variety of different cognitive symbols are possible. So let's take something that's super simple, something that you all know, and that is the idea of two. So two-ness, having two of something, the number two. That's the external reality. So there we got two goldfish. So how is that external reality of two-ness represented in your mind? Well, it could be represented with an internal symbol that looks a lot like the number that we use to represent two on a blackboard or when we're reading. That could be one of the ways that our mind represents this idea of two. On the other hand, it might represent it with an internal symbol that is literally two of something, right? So two dots might be how we represent the idea of two. Or it could be that 10 stands for two in your mind. And there are only 10 types of people in the world, those who understand binary and those who don't. So that 1-0 is how the idea of two is represented in a computer system. So that is binary for two. So first switch on, second switch off, or does it go back? No, first switch off, second switch on. I think it goes backwards. Anyways, I know of binary. I'm not fluent in binary, but those are three ways of representing the idea of two in your mind. And as a psychologist, as a cognitive psychologist, we would ask ourselves, which one of those do we use? And try to find out how it is that we represent things in our mind. So again, we got the external reality, for example, United States, and we have internal symbols. So you could represent the United States using a representation known as an imagery representation, where the representation looks like an image of the thing that you're trying to represent. So again, this is in our mind. Do not worry at all about how that gets implemented in the brain. That's another course. That's another level. We don't worry about implementation here. So it's completely fine to say, oh yeah, we got pictures of the United States in our brain. Wrong to say that. We got pictures of the United States in our mind. That's completely fine. Maybe that's the way the United States is represented in our mind, as an actual image of things. On the other hand, it's quite possible that the United States and the cities in the United States are represented as just a series of propositions. Just things like Los Angeles to New York, 2,790 miles. New York to Dallas, 1,547 miles. Dallas to Los Angeles, 1,433 miles. It might be that that's the way that we represent the United States. You'd need more than just those three propositions, but that could be one of the ways that it's represented. And then you start to think about, well, how can we possibly know which way things are represented? And the question comes with what sort of information that comes in and gets manipulated gives what sort of information that comes out. What representations would cause behavior? I'm losing my ability to come up with words. What representations, what are the implications or effects of having a certain representation on your ability to do certain behaviors? So for example, if I was to ask you, what direction is New Jersey from Dallas? And this is how your mind represented the United States. You'd be able to take a look at that and say, well, here's Dallas down here at the C, and then here's New Jersey over here at the B, and that's kind of northeast. So it's sort of northeast. You know, New Jersey is northeast from Dallas, but you'd be able to answer that question if you have this representation in your mind. On the other hand, if you have this representation in your mind, and I said, which direction is New Jersey compared to Dallas? You would take a look at that and say, don't have direction. I can't do it. I have no idea. You would be unable to answer that question. So it depends on the question. If I was to ask you, how far is it from Dallas to Los Angeles? And you had this representation, you can immediately say, oh yeah, 1,400 miles, give or take. If you had this representation in your mind, it's going to take a lot longer. And you're going to have to figure out what the key is and do some measuring and do some math. So what that representation is in your mind determines the type of processing that can be done. And we saw that last time with that train and bird problem, where if you represented it as a distance problem, it was near impossible. But if you represented it as a time problem, it was almost trivial. And that representational level, what representations does the system use and what processes does it employ to build and manipulate those representations? That's the work of cognitive psychology. That's what we do here. Models of the mind, and what do they mean for how we actually do behavior and process information. So any questions on what a representation is before we finish up by introducing two models of the mind? All right, awesome. So we are going to introduce two models to potentially understand letter recognition. So letter recognition is something that we as humans can do. So it would fall into that computational level. What is the problem faced? We can recognize letters. That is the problem that is faced. And now we want to understand it completely, and we're going to see what sort of models might we use in the representational level that would allow us to explain how it is that we can recognize, these scratches and indentations on surface. All right, so letter recognition. So just to make it a little bit formal, we're going to do a little bit of a psychology experiment right now. And we're going to start filling in the blanks of the computational level. So all I want you to do is, as soon as you see a letter here, call out what the letter is if you recognize it. Everybody good? C, P. All right. So if we knew nothing else about the human mind, we could at this point say the ability to see R, F, Z, and P, that's in the computational level. We know that we have that. So now we'd be looking for a representational level to see, well, what kind of strategies did we all use? What kind of mental cognition, mental thinking, mental processing did we use in order to do that task that we just did? So let's break it down to just how you might recognize the letter R. And I'm going to introduce two different models, two different ways of representing what your mind is doing that were real models that were proposed to answer this representational challenge. So the first one is called the template model. And that one basically says you have this external reality. You have the R. And that R gets projected onto an image processor. And that image processor then compares it to a template. And the thing to know about this template is that this template is based on, or this template model is based on the way that they used to do printing, where you would actually have letters that were carved out of metal, and then you would put ink on them, and then it would come down and it would print. So this template model, the idea was that template was basically letters that were almost like the game of perfection. They were like things that you could fit the letter into. And if the letter fit into that area, it fit into the template. So it was a very mechanical model. So you can imagine that this template is like a steel plate in your mind that has indentations that these letters can fit into. All right, and then once you find the place where the letter fits into, you make your decision as to what that particular letter is. So we have this external reality of the R. It gets sent to the image processor. So again, we're not worried about how that's done with our brains and our eyes. That's neuropsychology. We're dealing with the representations of the mind. We want to say that there's an image processor. Let's go with that idea. There's an image processor. So the R, the external reality, goes into the image processor. And then that image processor tries to fit into the template. And it starts up here at A, and it just goes through the template, kind of like trying to put it in like a puzzle piece almost, until it gets to R. And then it goes into that puzzle piece, and the decision is made that what I'm looking at is an R. So that was one model that was proposed in terms of how we recognize letters. Any questions on the template model? Okay, I'm going to show you another model. And I promised you demons, so let's get some demons. So the next model is known as the Pandemonium Model. And this was a model that was proposed by Selfridge back in 1959. And basically, here's the model. It says that you have your external reality again. And then that external reality gets seen by an image demon. For real. Like it gets seen in your mind. You have this image demon. And this image demon sends it up to a TV screen that is in this room. And inside that room are a whole bunch of demons that are known as feature demons. And these feature demons have symbols on their bellies. And the important thing about these feature demons is that they get really, really angry if they see something on that TV that looks like the symbol on their bellies. I don't know why, but that's just what they do. So they get really, really angry when they see something on that TV that matches the symbol on their belly. And then you have another room in your mind, and that room has cognitive demons. And these cognitive demons, they actually correspond to the different letters of our alphabet. And then finally, we have a decision demon, and that is the basic architecture. And the last thing that's missing is that each of these feature demons, you can imagine, this wasn't how Selfridge explained it, but you can imagine that they are on a group chat with some of the cognitive demons, but not all of the cognitive demons. Okay, so that first feature demon with the vertical stripe on its belly, it's in a group chat with cognitive demon R. It's in a group chat with cognitive demon P, and it's in that group chat with cognitive demon F. That second feature demon with that backwards looking C there, it's in a group chat with cognitive demon R, It's in a group chat with cognitive demon P. And that, I believe, is it. And then the one with the slash that goes from the bottom left to the top right, it is in a group chat with cognitive demon Z. And then we have that last one with the slash that goes from the top right to the bottom, top left to the bottom right. That's in a group chat with cognitive demon R. So those are the connections between the feature demons and the cognitive demons. So how do we recognize a letter according to this model? Well, we have the external reality of the R, and that R appears on the belly of the image demon. And that image demon says, oh, okay, I got something on my belly now. I'm going to send that up to the TV. And it sends it up to the TV, and PowerPoint's going to do this to me again. I thought I fixed it, but I didn't. Okay, one last thing you need to know about these demons. When they get angry, they go invisible because PowerPoint decided it's going to go invisible. Okay, so the R gets transmitted to the TV. And that first cognitive demon with the vertical stripe on its belly, it sees a vertical stripe up on that TV. And it gets really, really angry. So angry that it disappears. But it just goes invisible. But it sends out a group text. And it sends a note to the F cognitive demon. And it says, I can't believe it. Vertical line on the TV. What is this world coming to? And it sends another message to the P cognitive demon. It says, I can't believe it. I am so angry. Vertical line on the TV. And it sends a message to that R cognitive demon. And it says, can you believe it? Vertical line. What is this world coming to? And then the next feature demon takes a look at the TV. And it says, crescent on the TV. I'm so angry, I'm going to go invisible. But I'm also going to text my group chat, and it tells cognitive demon P, my symbol's on the TV. This is outrageous. And it tells cognitive demon R, my symbol's on the TV. This is not what's supposed to happen. So incredibly angry. And then that next feature demon with the slash that goes from the bottom left to the top right, it's taking a look at the TV and it's like, you know what, I'm fine. My belly symbol's not up on there. I'm having a good day. But that final feature demon with the slash that goes in the opposite direction, it takes a look at that TV and it says, oh my gosh, slash going from top left to bottom right on the TV, so angry. I got to tell everybody in my group chat, it only has the one in its group chat, and it tells demon R. So at this point, we go to the cognitive demons. And demon R is saying, hey, you know what? I don't know what's going on in that feature room, but I just got text from 3 of my feature demons, right? 3 of my feature demons texted me. And cognitive demon P says, hey, you know what? I know something's going on in that room, but I only heard from 2 feature demons. And then cognitive demon F says, hey, you know what? Yeah, something's going on. They put something on the TV, I bet, but I only heard from one of my cognitive demons. And feature demons. And cognitive demon Z says, oh, they put something on the TV? I didn't know. Nobody told me. So we have 3 for the cognitive demon R, 2 for the cognitive demon P, 1 for the cognitive demon F. That decision demon is looking there and it says, well, who got contacted the most? Cognitive demon R. That must be an R on the TV. So that is the Pandemonium model. And we are going to take a look at this in a little bit more detail next time. But I'm going to leave you with this question. In terms of how do you recognize R? Remember that this is the cognitive demon model, and the template model was a very mechanical model where it was almost as if your image had to be stamped into the template and match up perfectly like a jigsaw puzzle. So the question then becomes, in terms of how do you recognize R, what about different fonts? And we know at that computational level that we can recognize different fonts. So what would these 2 models predict about our ability to recognize different fonts? Think about that, and we're going to see what is going on next time. But that is it for today. Thanks for coming. Thanks for playing along. And we'll pick up at this point next time.